Welcome to Horoscope Reads, the sanctuary where the stars speak their secrets in full-hearted honesty. If you crave deep, unfiltered explorations of the Zodiac complete with passion, poetry, and a fearless dive into every sign's shadowy corners, hit subscribe, tap that like button, and join our cosmic tribe. Today, we're unveiling Zodiac matches that make the best couples. Ranked from 12 to 1. These pairings blend light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, forging bonds that endure storms and shine brightest in the dark. Ready to discover which duos unlock true cosmic harmony? Let's begin with number 12. Aries plus Virgo. 12. Aries plus Virgo. The firebrand and the craftsman Aries blazes into Virgo's carefully ordered universe like a comet, its fiery energy shattering the stillness of precision and routine. Where Aries thrives on impulse and daring leaps, Virgo measures twice, analyzes endlessly, and crafts every step with painstaking care. Together, they form an alliance of strength and strategy, Aries' bold ambition fused with Virgo's meticulous planning. At their best, they conquer challenges head-on, Aries supplying the courage to charge, Virgo providing the blueprint to succeed. Yet beneath the synergy lies friction. Aries' impatience smolders against Virgo's slow-burning caution. Aries roars for action, Virgo whispers for reflection. Their battles can erupt in storms of criticism and fiery speeches, each believing the other too reckless or too restrained. Emotionally, Aries demands passion, spontaneity, and constant affirmation. Virgo, sensitive beneath their critical mask, yearns for consistency, thoughtful gestures, and the security of predictable devotion. When Aries' flame grows too bright, Virgo retreats into perfectionism. When Virgo hesitates, Aries in frustration, Virgo's intelligence demands clarity and precision, while Aries' heart beats to the rhythm of instinct. Their love story is a dance between head and heart, sometimes in perfect harmony, sometimes stepping on each other's toes in a frantic shuffle. Aries admires Virgo's skill, dedication, and humble strength. They see in Virgos the artisans, who can turn raw energy into lasting achievements. Yet Aries can grow resentful of Virgo's endless edits. Yearning instead for the raw authenticity Aries believes perfectionism distorts. Virgo, in turn, reveres Aries' bravery, impulsive honesty, and inspiring drive. They're drawn to the warrior spirit that charges into the fray without a backward glance. But Virgo's critical mind worries Aries will burn out, leaving a trail of scorched opportunities in their wake. When Aries' fire scalds Virgo's gentle soul, Virgo's critique becomes a shield they criticize to protect themselves from getting hurt. But their words can cut deeper than any flame. Aries, wounded, may lash out in anger or storm away, leaving Virgo to question whether they'll ever achieve the perfect harmony they seek. Yet in conflict lies their greatest growth. Aries teaches Virgo to release control, to embrace chaos as the canvas for new triumphs. Virgo shows Aries the power of patience, the beauty of refinement, and the strength born from thoughtful persistence. Intimacy for this pair is a tapestry woven of wild nights and quiet mornings, where Aries' spontaneity blends with Virgo's rituals, candlelit suppers planned to perfection, impulsive weekend getaways thrown together on a whim. Their shared challenges balancing risk and caution. Passion and prudence become the crucible that forges their bond. Each learns to temper their extremes for the other. Aries softens in Virgo's care. Virgo warms in Aries' courage. Trust grows slowly but deeply, rooted in Virgo's reliable devotion and Aries' fierce loyalty. When Aries promises to protect, Virgo believes. When Virgo pledges to stand by Aries' side, Aries feels invincible. Their union is a testament to the alchemy of opposites, a spark ignited by impulsive fire, nurtured by methodical hands, transforming raw heat into a flame that can warm both bodies and minds, in the dark corners of their souls. Aries' fear of stagnation, Virgo's dread of imperfection, they find solace in each other's strengths. Aries charges ahead, so Virgo need not fear time wasted. Virgo crafts precautions, so Aries need not fear missteps. Together, they teach us that the fiercest love often arises from the greatest contrasts. When the warrior and the craftsman stand shoulder to shoulder, they become an unstoppable force, wild yet wise, passionate yet precise. 11 Taurus plus Sagittarius, the steadfast heart and the wandering soul. Taurus anchors Sagittarius' restless spirit with the steady hum of devotion, a grounding force that soothes the wanderer's perpetual yearning for the horizon. Their connection begins with a spark, Taurus' sensual warmth meeting Sagittarius' fiery enthusiasm in a dance of earth and flame. Emotionally, Taurus offers a sanctuary, soft sheets of stability woven from loyalty, routine, and tender care. Sagittarius arrives bearing gifts of laughter, adventure, and boundless optimism, transforming Taurus's haven into a vibrant playground of new experiences. Yet beneath this magnetic pole lies tension. Taurus craves permanence, while Sagittarius transcends all boundaries. Taurus builds walls of comfort. Sagittarius scales them in search of vistas unseen. Their love thrives on this tension but can fray when Earth tires of endless sky. Taurus sees safety in the familiar, a favorite cafe, a well-worn path, the reassurance of nightly routines. Sagittarius, however, awakes to the call of distant landscapes and uncharted ideas. Ever impatient with the slow embrace of habit, their intelligence pulses differently. Taurus's mind measures with the precision of seasons: plant, grow, harvest, while Sagittarius leaps from philosophy to philosophy, like a falcon riding thermals of thought. Each admires the other's worldview but struggles to speak the same language of time. In conflict, Taurus's stubbornness hardens like winter's frost, clinging to positions until they freeze any possibility of compromise. Sagittarius, stung by immobility, lashes out with sharp truths and sudden departures. Believing freedom demands honesty even when it wounds. Their intimacy unfolds in phases. Taurus's tactile devotion, slow kisses, lingering touches meets Sagittarius's fireworks of spontaneity, midnight road trips, impulsive declarations. Together, they create a tapestry of comfort and exhilaration. Yet the same impulse that draws them apart can draw them together. Taurus learns to taste the rush of the unknown, to find thrill in breaking routine. Sagittarius learns the power of roots, discovering that true freedom blooms from a foundation unshakable. Sagittarius's wit and humor chase away Taurus's shadows of self-doubt, while Taurus's quiet strength tames Sagittarius's fears of abandonment, each offering a cure for the other's darkest insecurities. But beware the sting of betrayal. Taurus's wounded heart builds thicker walls, turning care into possessiveness that suffocates Sagittarius's need for space. Sagittarius's wounded pride soars away, leaving Taurus clutching at ghosts of promise. Their greatest tests lie in balance. Taurus must trust that love does not chain Sagittarius, while Sagittarius must honor that love does not demand perpetual flight. When these truths are forgotten, their bond frays in the tug-of-war between soil and sky. In moments of understanding, they become a living testament to the alchemy of contrasts: earth-sustaining fire, fire igniting, earth creating warmth, and light neither could achieve alone. Their loyalty is forged in duality. Taurus stands by Sagittarius's side when the path grows uncertain. Sagittarius champions Taurus's dreams when the ground feels too heavy to stand upon. Together, they teach us that the richest love mixes stability with surprise, that home is both a place and a partner willing to journey beyond its walls. Their union is a lesson in compromise. Taurus softens long enough to taste the wind. Sagittarius returns, richer for the voyage, to the hearth that always awaits. In the end, they show us that the greatest adventures are shared and that sometimes the bravest homecomings follow the wildest departures. 10. Gemini plus Scorpio. The electric dance of light and shadow when Gemini meets Scorpio. The air crackles with an undeniable electric charge, a collision of light and shadow that promises both fascination and danger. Gemini's mercurial charm draws Scorpio's intense gaze. Intrigued by the mystery that seems just beyond reach, Gemini lives in the dazzling realm of ideas, a whirlwind of curiosity, conversation, and endless questions. Scorpio, by contrast, dwells in the depths of feeling, harboring secrets and emotions too profound for casual glance. Together, they balance intellect and intuition in a delicate dance. Scorpio's passion seeps into Gemini's playful spirit like ink staining water, evocable and deepening. Gemini's lightness, in turn, teases Scorpio out of their guarded fortress, coaxing laughter from behind the walls of secrecy. Emotionally, Gemini flits like a hummingbird, bright, fast, often skimming the surface, while Scorpio plunges into the ocean's abyss, seeking truths that others fear to face. This contrast both entices and exhausts them, for their worlds spin at different speeds. Trust is a battlefield. Scorpio's need for loyalty and transparency clashes with Gemini's penchant for freedom and flirtation. Scorpio's eyes miss nothing. Gemini's mind wanders dangerously close to temptation. The tension is constant, a fire threatening to both warm and burn. In conflict, Gemini's verbal agility becomes a weapon and a shield they dance around. Scorpio storms with witty deflections and elusive answers. Scorpio, relentless and unwavering, digs deeper, demanding authenticity and raw honesty. Their intimacy is a secret language. Geminis touch light as air, Scorpios as consuming as a wildfire. Together, they explore the spectrum of connection. From playful teasing to profound transformation, Scorpio's jealousy simmers beneath the surface, a dark undertow threatening to pull Gemini under. Gemini's restless nature flares against these chains, craving space and variety like oxygen itself. Yet when their stars align, they create a fusion of mind and soul, a union that transcends the ordinary, a labyrinth where both lose themselves and find each other anew. Gemini teaches Scorpio to lighten up, to laugh and dance in the daylight rather than brood in shadows. Scorpio teaches Gemini to feel deeply, to face their fears, and to honor the power of emotional truth. Their love is often tested by extremes, moments of dazzling harmony shattered by storms of misunderstanding and doubt, but the intensity they share keeps pulling them back like a powerful magnet. Scorpio's mysterious allure is both a siren's call and a challenge. Gemini's elusive spirit is both a breath of fresh air and a puzzle. Together, they chase and evade, never quite capturing, yet never letting go. Their partnership is a wild, unpredictable symphony, notes of passion, curiosity, suspicion, and trust intertwining in an ever-shifting melody. Scorpio's protective instincts can become suffocating. Gemini's need for freedom can feel like betrayal. Navigating this balance demands courage and profound commitment. In moments of vulnerability, they discover the rare magic of a love that is both a sanctuary and a battlefield where wounds heal and transformation blooms. Ultimately, Gemini and Scorpio remind us that love's greatest power lies in embracing paradoxal and dark, freedom and fidelity, mind and heart woven into a single, breathtaking dance. 9. Cancer plus Aquarius. The emotional tide meets the cool breeze. When Cancer and Aquarius come together, it's like the ocean meeting the wind, sometimes harmonious, sometimes turbulent, but always charged with an undeniable energy that shapes their shared world. Cancer's tides of emotion crash gently against Aquarius's steady, refreshing breeze of detachment. Cancer's heart beats with a deep, nurturing rhythm, yearning to protect and be protected. They crave emotional safety, home, and the warmth of belonging. Aquarius, on the other hand, thrives on freedom, innovation, and an unyielding quest for truth beyond tradition. This pair often feels like opposite elements drawn together by a magnetic force. Cancer's sensitivity brushes aloofness, stirring questions about closeness and independence. Cancer wants to envelop. Aquarius wants to explore. Cancer's loyalty is rooted in feelings, their actions driven by care and instinct. Aquarius values ideals and principles, sometimes prioritizing causes or visions over personal bonds, which can leave Cancer feeling adrift or neglected. At their best, Cancer softens Aquarius's emotional detachment, teaching them the value of vulnerability and heartfelt connection. Aquarius, in turn, encourages Cancer to expand their horizons, to look beyond the familiar shores and embrace new perspectives. Communication can be a delicate dance. Cancer speaks in waves of feeling and intuition, while Aquarius prefers the language of ideas and logic. Misunderstandings arise when emotions cloud clarity or ideals overshadow empathy. Cancer's mood swings and need for reassurance sometimes collide with Aquarius's cool rationality and desire for space. This can cause emotional turbulence that tests the resilience of their bond. Aquarius may seem distant or unpredictable to Cancer, who craves consistency and emotional availability, yet Aquarius's quirks and originality ignite Cancer's curiosity and admiration. Together, they can build a sanctuary where emotional depth meets intellectual freedom, a home where feelings are honored and ideas celebrated. But achieving this balance demands patience, respect, and open hearts. Cancer's protective instincts can sometimes feel smothering to Aquarius, who recoils from emotional intensity that threatens their autonomy. Aquarius's rebellious spirit can unsettle Cancer's need for security and routine. When tensions rise, Cancer withdraws into their shell, while Aquarius detaches further, creating a silent gulf that neither knows how to bridge icily. Healing requires vulnerability and honest dialogue. Their love can be a profound lesson in acceptance, accepting differences without trying to change each other. Learning to dance in the space between emotion and intellect, Cancer brings warmth and tenderness to Aquarius's often impersonal world, reminding them of the human heart behind every idea and ideal. Aquarius brings freshness and vision to Cancer's protective realm, inspiring growth beyond emotional confines. This union is both a challenge and a gift, a meeting of water and air that can nurture new life or stir fierce storms, depending on how well they navigate their contrasts. When Cancer and Aquarius find harmony, their relationship becomes a beautiful blend of compassion and innovation, tradition and progress, grounding and soaring. Together, they teach us that love is not about becoming the same but about honoring each other's unique currents, flowing together without losing their own essence. 8. Leo plus Capricorn, the ambitious duo, learning to share control. When Leo's fiery pride meets Capricorn's steadfast determination, a powerful force emerges, two ambitious souls striving to carve their mark on the world, each with a different style but a shared hunger for success. Leo commands attention with a regal presence, their charisma lighting up every room they enter. They crave admiration, applause, and the thrill of being the center of their universe. Capricorn, meanwhile, builds silently and patiently, valuing discipline, structure, and long-term achievement above fleeting glory. At first glance, their energies might clash. Leo's exuberance, seeming reckless to Capricorn's cautious mind. Capricorn's reserved nature, feeling cold to Leo's warm heart. Yet beneath the surface lies a profound potential for balance. Leo's confidence can inspire Capricorn to loosen their grip on control and embrace spontaneity, while steady hand grounds Leo's sometimes impulsive passions. Together, they can build empires fueled by both vision and practicality. Capricorn's ambition is fueled by duty and legacy. They want to climb to the top and remain there with honor. Leo seeks to shine bright and be remembered for their brilliance and generosity. This shared desire for greatness fuels their connection. Even if their methods differ, power struggles may arise as both signs desire leadership. Leo's natural command sometimes challenged by Capricorn's strategic authority. Learning to share the spotlight without diminishing the other's flame becomes their greatest test. Emotionally, Leo's warmth demands recognition and affection, while Capricorn's reserved nature often hides vulnerability behind a mask of control. Leo's passion can crack Capricorn's tough exterior, revealing a more tender, devoted partner. Capricorn's loyalty and consistency offer Leo a safe harbor, a foundation from which their fiery spirit can launch. Leo's optimism and charm soften Capricorn's seriousness, reminding them to savor life's joys, not just its achievements. Communication between them must bridge Leo's expressive heart and Capricorn's pragmatic mind. When Leo feels unappreciated, Capricorn may seem detached. When Capricorn feels overwhelmed, Leo may interpret it as rejection. Both must learn patience and respect for each other's rhythms. Leo's need for celebration and Capricorn's focus on responsibility can create tension if unchecked. Capricorn's cautious nature sometimes frustrates Leo's desire for bold leaps, while Leo's craving for attention can test Capricorn's calm discipline. But when aligned, their ambitions become unstoppable. Their relationship is a dance of give and take. Leo ignites the fire. Capricorn fans the flames with endurance and strategy. Together, they forge a legacy neither could achieve alone. In darker moments, Leo's pride can blind them to Capricorn's silent sacrifices, while Capricorn's cold pragmatism can wound Leo's sensitive ego. A failure to communicate can harden walls between them. Yet, if they navigate these shadows, their union becomes a powerful partnership of strength, passion, and vision, a true dynasty built on love and mutual respect. Their love story is about mastering control without losing warmth, ambition without losing tenderness, and power without losing heart. Leo and Capricorn teach us that true dominance is not about overshadowing but about lifting each other higher, shining brighter together than apart. 7. Virgo plus Pisces, grounded logic and dreamy affection in balance. Virgo and Pisces stand as opposing forces in the zodiac, one rooted in reality, the other drifting in dreams, yet together, they create a beautiful harmony, a yin and yang that fills the gaps in each other's souls. Virgo's mind is a precise machine, craving order, clarity, and practicality. Their attention to detail borders on perfectionism, often a double-edged sword that sharpens their judgment but can also lead to harsh self-criticism. Pisces, in contrast, swims through an ocean of emotions and intuition, their heart wide open to the unseen currents of life. They dream, they imagine, they feel deeply, often losing themselves in fantasy to escape a harsh reality. Where Virgo dissects and analyzes, Pisces embraces and accepts. Where Virgo's focus is on fixing and improving, Pisces' gift lies in compassion, and understanding. Together, they balance each other. Virgo's logic anchoring Pisces' ethereal nature, Pisces' empathy, softening Virgo's harsh critiques. In love, Virgo offers steady hands to catch Pisces' fragile heart, while Pisces teaches Virgo to surrender, control, and embrace vulnerability. This dance between caution and surrender is the core of their bond. Yet, beneath this complementary surface lies a complex tension. Virgo's critical eye sometimes stings Pisces' sensitive spirit, while Pisces' mood swings can unsettle Virgo's need for routine and stability. Virgo fears being overwhelmed by Pisces' emotional depth, and Pisces fears being confined by Virgo's practicality. Their challenge is to respect these differences without trying to change one another. Virgo's need for order can appear rigid to dreamy Pisces, who values freedom and fluidity. Conversely, Pisces' unpredictability can feel chaotic to Virgo's structured world. Still, both share a profound desire to serve and heal others, forging a strong emotional connection. Pisces' romantic idealism inspires Virgo to dream beyond the tangible, while Virgo's grounded wisdom keeps Pisces from drifting too far into illusion. They teach each other the value of balance between dreams and reality. Both are selfless in their own ways, Virgo through acts of service, Pisces through emotional generosity. This mutual giving fosters deep loyalty, even when words fail them. However, when Virgo's criticisms become too sharp, or Pisces retreats into escapism, the cracks in their bond become evident, threatening the fragile peace they've built. Communication is key. Virgo must learn to express love beyond logic, and Pisces must learn to face reality without fear. When they succeed, their union becomes a sanctuary of trust and healing. Emotionally, Virgo offers protection and care beneath a sometimes stern exterior, while Pisces offers unconditional love and acceptance despite flaws. Their relationship is a constant learning process, a journey of patience, forgiveness, and mutual growth. Virgo tempers Pisces' flights of fancy. Pisces softens Virgo's hardness. Together, they embody the sacred dance of the mind and the heart, showing us that love flourishes when logic meets intuition, and reason meets passion. Virgo and Pisces remind us that even the most contrasting souls can create a love that heals, nurtures, and transforms. 6. Libra plus Taurus, romantic and stable. A union built on trust. Libra and Taurus come together like a soft melody playing over a steady heartbeat. One graceful, one grounded, crafting a love story, both romantic and enduring. Taurus's loyalty runs deep, a steadfast current beneath the surface, while Libra's charm and social grace create an atmosphere where love can blossom with elegance. Together, they build a world of comfort and beauty. Taurus craves stability, security, and tangible expressions of love. Their touch is deliberate, their promises unshakable, but their stubbornness can test Libra's patience. Libra seeks harmony above all else, an artist of relationships who balances feelings and fairness, often avoiding conflict to keep the peace. Yet beneath this diplomacy lies a fierce desire to connect deeply. Their shared appreciation for beauty and sensual pleasures draws them close. Dinners by candlelight, meaningful conversations, and quiet moments wrapped in each other's presence are their sacred rituals. Libra's indecisiveness can frustrate Taurus, whose mind moves at the pace of certainty and habit. Taurus demands clarity. Libra dances between options, often to avoid hurting feelings, but Taurus's steady nature grounds Libra's airy tendencies, helping them settle into commitment without fear, while Libra's ability to see all sides softens Taurus's stubborn edges. In love, Libra is the poet, weaving words and smiles that light up Taurus's earthy heart, while Taurus is the rock, providing strength and consistency Libra secretly craves. Their challenges arise when Taurus's possessiveness clashes with Libra's desire for social freedom. Trust must be nurtured with open hearts and honest conversations. Libra's natural diplomacy shines brightest here, smoothing over Taurus's occasional jealousy with gentle reassurance, creating a safe space where both can be themselves. Emotionally, Taurus offers unwavering loyalty and protective strength, while Libra offers intellectual connection and emotional balance, a rare and precious complement. Both despise drama, preferring peaceful coexistence, but when conflicts arise, they risk avoidance rather than confrontation, which can build silent walls between them. Their love is a dance, sometimes slow and steady, other times swirling in passionate bursts, but always elegant and meaningful. Taurus teaches Libra the power of patience and endurance, while Libra reminds Taurus that flexibility and compromise are vital for lasting harmony. Together, they build a sanctuary where trust is the foundation, and romance the air they breathe, a partnership that withstands the storms because it is rooted in deep mutual respect. Libra and Taurus prove that love grounded in trust and nurtured with tenderness becomes a masterpiece. Timeless, beautiful, and unwavering. 5. Sagittarius. Aries adventurous, fiery, and endlessly exciting when Sagittarius and Aries collide. It's a blaze of energy so intense it can both exhilarate and consume. A fiery dance of freedom and passion that never knows boredom. Aries bursts forward, like a comet, impulsive and bold, driven by a desire to conquer and experience life at full speed, while Sagittarius follows with an adventurous spirit, hungry for knowledge and new horizons. Together, they create a relationship fueled by excitement and fearless exploration, no challenge too big, no dream too wild. They are warriors of the heart, battling boredom with endless quests and shared conquests. Aries is straightforward. Sometimes, aggressive nature ignites Sagittarius's love for honesty and open expression, but their clashes are inevitable when Aries demands immediate action, and Sagittarius craves philosophical freedom. Sagittarius is the eternal optimist, seeing possibilities where Aries sees obstacles. And this can both inspire and frustrate Aries' need for control and quick results. Both signs fear being trapped, Aries by routines, Sagittarius by limits, so they respect each other's need for independence. Yet they also fiercely protect the bond they build. Their fiery natures mean their love is never lukewarm, it's a constant blaze that burns bright, sometimes dangerously close to consuming everything in its path. Sagittarius's humor and lightheartedness soften Aries' intensity, while Aries' courage grounds Sagittarius's sometimes reckless idealism. Emotional vulnerability is a challenge. Both prefer action over words, and their fiery tempers can lead to explosive arguments that fade as quickly as they flare up. The key to their lasting connection is mutual respect. Aries learns patience, while Sagittarius learns commitment, without losing their essence. In bed, their chemistry is electric, a match of primal energy and passionate curiosity that keeps the flame alive for years. Sagittarius admires Aries' courage and leadership, while Aries is drawn to wisdom and adventurous soul. Together, they push each other beyond comfort zones. However, their shared impulsiveness can lead to reckless decisions, testing the limits of trust and understanding. They thrive on change and movement, whether in travel, ideas, or challenges, and stagnation is their greatest enemy. Their journey together is a wild ride, exhilarating, intense, and unpredictable, but it is also a powerful union of two spirits who refuse to settle for anything less than extraordinary. Sagittarius and Aries prove that love isn't about playing it safe, but about diving headfirst into the unknown, with passion as their guide and freedom as their promise. 4. Scorpio plus Cancer. Deep, transformative love with intense devotions. Scorpio and Cancer, when joined, create a union drenched in emotional depth and mysterious intensity. Two water signs whose hearts beat in silent yet profound harmony. Scorpio's passion burns beneath a cloak of secrecy and control, while Cancer's nurturing soul craves safety and emotional connection, creating a powerful magnetic pull between them. Their love is not casual. It is a sacred bond forged in the fires of vulnerability, trust, and shared secrets that only they dare to reveal. Both carry scars and shadows from past betrayals, making their loyalty both fierce and fragile, a delicate dance of guarding their hearts while daring to surrender fully. Cancer provides the warmth and home Scorpio often seeks but rarely finds in others. Scorpio offers the unwavering strength and protection Cancer needs to thrive. Their emotions run deep, and while they communicate mostly through feelings, misunderstandings can erupt like sudden storms, shaking the foundations of their trust. Scorpio jealous tendencies meet Cancer's sensitivity, creating waves of insecurity that test their commitment but also deepen their understanding of one another. Yet, their connection is transformative. Scorpio's intense drive to evolve and heal blends with Cancer's gentle support to nurture growth and rebirth. They are each other's safe harbor and fiercest protector, willing to battle the world's cruelty together with an unbreakable loyalty. Scorpio's enigmatic nature intrigues Cancer's caring heart, which in turn softens Scorpio's guarded exterior, allowing for rare moments of openness and tenderness. Both signs are prone to emotional extremes, but their shared ability to empathize makes their love profound, often feeling like an unspoken telepathy of souls. Scorpio's strategic mind can sometimes clash with Cancer's mood swings, but their mutual desire for emotional security helps them weather these storms. Intimacy for them is more than physical, it's a merging of souls, a sacred ceremony where trust and desire intertwine to create a bond few can understand. When hurt, Scorpio's revenge can be merciless, and Cancer's retreat can be icy, making forgiveness a crucial yet challenging part of their journey. Despite their darkness, together they bring out the light, healing old wounds through the power of love that feels destined and eternal. Scorpio and Cancer's relationship is a deep ocean of passion and emotion, where vulnerability is strength and love is both their weapon and sanctuary. 3. Gemini plus Libra. Airy intellectuals who thrive in each other's company, Gemini and Libra, come together like a fresh breeze on a warm daylight. Breezy, and full of endless possibilities, their connection sparkles with wit and charm, drawing them into conversations that flow effortlessly from the mundane to the profound. Both ruled by air, they share a love for ideas, socializing, and mental stimulation, creating a partnership that thrives on intellectual synergy and mutual curiosity. Gemini's quicksilver mind darts from topic to topic, sometimes restless and unpredictable, while Libra's diplomatic nature smooths the edges, seeking balance and harmony in every exchange. Together, they inspire each other to think bigger and broader, sharing perspectives that challenge and expand their worldviews. Emotionally, both can be somewhat detached, preferring to analyze feelings rather than dive headfirst into them, which can keep their connection light, but sometimes superficial. Libra's deep need for fairness and peace tempers Gemini's impulsive and sometimes erratic energy, creating a delicate dance of give and take that keeps tension at bay. Gemini's playful nature complements Libra's romantic tendencies, making their relationship not only mentally stimulating but also filled with charm and flirtation. Their love is often marked by laughter and endless conversations that weave a tapestry of shared dreams and ideals. However, indecisiveness can plague them both. Gemini's dual nature and Libra's desire to weigh every option may lead to delays and uncertainty in their journey together. When conflict arises, Libra seeks compromise, while Gemini can avoid deep emotional confrontation, which sometimes leaves underlying issues unresolved. Their social lives are often intertwined, and they enjoy being seen as the perfect intellectual couple, admired for their easy chemistry and sparkling dialogues. Despite their airy demeanor, they both crave connection and validation, and when they feel truly understood by each other, their bond deepens beyond the surface. Gemini's adaptability and Libra's steadiness can create a flexible yet stable partnership that navigates life's unpredictability with grace. They may struggle with emotional intimacy, but their intellectual compatibility keeps them engaged and committed. Their shared love for beauty, art, and culture enriches their relationship, often making their world feel like a canvas painted with endless colors and ideas. Gemini and Libra prove that sometimes the strongest bonds are those built on the foundation of the mind, where conversation is love and understanding is the language of the soul. 2. Capricorn plus Taurus, power couple driven by loyalty and shared goals. Capricorn and Taurus are the epitome of stability and ambition fused into a forceful partnership that rarely bends under pressure. Both earth signs, they speak the language of perseverance, patience, and long-term vision, a union built to last through storms and sunshine alike. Their connection is grounded in mutual respect for each other's work ethic and practical approach to life, where every decision is measured and every step deliberate. Capricorn's relentless drive to climb social and professional ladders meets Taurus's steadfast determination to secure comfort and material security, creating a balance of ambition and sensibility. Loyalty is their unshakable foundation. Both signs value trust and commitment above all else, rarely entertaining distractions or betrayals that could jeopardize their bond. Emotionally, they are not the most expressive, preferring actions over words, but their steadfast presence is a language of love that resonates deeply. Capricorn's cautious nature and Taurus's stubbornness can sometimes lead to clashes, but their shared values smooth over conflict with a mutual desire to keep the partnership intact. They are protectors of each other's dreams, fiercely guarding their shared life against external threats and internal doubts. Their sensual connection is powerful yet understated, a slow-burning fire that sustains their intimacy over years, growing stronger as time passes. Both fear instability, so they work tirelessly to build a fortress of safety emotionally, financially, and socially where their love can thrive without interruption. Capricorn's practical wisdom tempers Taurus's occasional indulgence, while Taurus grounds Capricorn's occasional pessimism with calm reassurance and warmth. They communicate with honesty and directness, valuing clear boundaries and expectations that prevent misunderstandings and foster deep trust. Ambition flows in their veins, but never at the expense of their connection. They find joy in shared victories and comfort in steady routines. Capricorn admires Taurus's ability to savor life's pleasures, while Taurus respects Capricorn's strategic mind and leadership. Despite their solidity, both must guard against rigidity that can stagnate the relationship. Growth requires flexibility, a challenge they face with measured effort. Together, they are a power couple in the truest sense, unyielding, loyal, and prepared to weather any storm. Their bond, a testament to patience and unwavering dedication. Capricorn and Taurus's love is a slow dance of resilience and devotion, where every step is purposeful, every touch steady, and every promise kept through the ages. 1. Leo plus Sagittarius, a dynamic, passionate match that inspires endless growth. Leo and Sagittarius come together. The cosmos ignites a firestorm of passion, adventure, and endless possibilities. Both fire signs, they share an insatiable hunger for life, boundless energy, and a love for being in the spotlight. Together, they are unstoppable. Leo's radiant confidence and magnetic charm blend seamlessly with Sagittarius's free spirit and philosophical outlook, creating a dynamic duo that thrives on exploration and mutual admiration. Their relationship is a constant dance of excitement, with Leo's desire for loyalty and admiration balanced by Sagittarius's craving for freedom and new experiences. Emotionally, they connect on a deep level through shared enthusiasm and honesty, often inspiring each other to break boundaries and expand horizons. Both are generous souls, quick to support and encourage one another, fueling a relationship built on respect and exhilaration. Leo's protective nature embraces Sagittarius's wanderlust, while Sagittarius's optimism softens Leo's occasional need for control, allowing them to grow together without suffocation. Their conversations are lively, filled with humor, bold ideas, and dreams that span continents and lifetimes, making their bond intellectually stimulating as well as deeply emotional. Passion in this match is fierce and undeniable, a blazing fire that fuels not only their love life but their shared ambitions and creative pursuits. Challenges arise when Leo's need for admiration bumps against Sagittarius's blunt honesty and need for independence, but their underlying trust helps them navigate these moments with grace. Both signs hate stagnation. They push each other toward self-improvement and new adventures, never allowing complacency to settle in. Sagittarius admires Leo's regal presence and loyalty, while Leo is drawn to Sagittarius's boundless optimism and fearless spirit. Their love story is one of growth and transformation, where every obstacle is met with courage and every victory celebrated with grandeur. In the face of conflict, their fiery temperaments can flare, but their passion quickly rekindles the warmth between them, proving that their bond is stronger than any momentary spark. Together, they are not just lovers but comrades on a journey of self-discovery, each inspiring the other to shine brighter and dream bigger. Their shared zest for life makes every day an adventure, and their relationship a blazing beacon for all who witness their union. Leo and Sagittarius are the ultimate power couple of the zodiac, their love a passionate flame that fuels endless growth, boundless joy, and a connection that refuses to be dimmed. Thank you for exploring these powerful zodiac matches with me. If you found this journey through the stars enlightening and inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your own zodiac love stories. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the mysteries of the cosmos here on Horoscope Reads, where the stars tell your story.